Welcome, music lovers, to another episode of Elevation, where we take a look at some of the best entertainment has to offer in the music realm and in the film realm. And this episode of Elevation, we're going to take a look back at the 90s and spotlight the male soul singers / groups of the 90s. Now, the 90s was a unique decade in that it started out with the remnants of the New Jack Swing era that was so dominant in the late 80s, and it bled into the early 90s, and it really set forth the culture musically in the soul realm, of the 90s. And by the time we got to the end of the 90s, then we had the neo-soul generation that really took over, that gave us a more earthly culture and sound to our music. But in between both of those particular eras, there was something bubbling under, and that was the renaissance of the singing group or the soul group for males and for females. In this episode, we're going to be looking at some of the male groups that took off and were so dominant in the early 90s and all throughout the decade, particularly with this music format. Now, we've seen soul groups dominate soul music for in the past. We look back and we see the whole decade of the 60s and a little bit into the 70s with groups like the Flamingos, the Falcons, the Independents, the Dells, the Temptations, the Miracles. They were dominant, in the soul music realm. And so it wasn't unique for us to have that happen in soul music. But we got away from it because disco and funk had taken over. And then we had the strong male leads that were really dominating, the whole deal with everybody from Teddy Pendergrass to Michael to Prince, and all the names that was dominant. But then we got to the beginning of the 90s, and then we had two groups that you already know that are at the top of this charts, which is JODECI and Boyz II Men. And the success of those two groups caused a fever at music and at record labels that made it so that every record label and their mama was looking for the next group like Boyz II Men and like JODECI. And they were scouring the country, signing every Tom, Dick, and Abdul that could sing in a group. And if they didn't have or couldn't find it, then they were also looking at their own roster of artists, and they were throwing artists together to create groups. That's what those two groups, Boyz II Men and JODECI, did, in not only resurrecting the soul singing group, but it made it so that everybody was looking for the next one of them. And that's why we had so many groups in that era that was predominant throughout the whole radio airplay and then soul music culture. And with that, being said, we had to do a top 20 list this time instead of a top 10 because there were so many groups that we didn't want to leave anybody out. And we actually wound up doing that because there were some groups that I actually loved that couldn't break into the top 20. We had groups like Low Key, Portrait, who I love, couldn't make the list. Simple Pleasure, Men of Vision, Men at Large, Total Commitment. There were so many that were being dropped. UNV, To the Extreme, that had hit records, at radio, and they just couldn't crack this top 20 because that's how many artists that were, on the list that were that great during the decade of the 90s. Now, before we get into the top 20, there's just two caveats we have to throw out there so that you understand why some artists didn't make the list as well, which is there were some groups that were actually pretty strong in the 90s, but their impact or their start actually fell into the 80s. And so they're more of an 80s incarnation than they were a 90s incarnation. So that's why you wouldn't see groups like Levert, Guy, Surface, Force MDs, just to name a few, New Edition, just to name a few, you know, because their impact was more into the 80s and it bled into the 90s. You know, and then there's one artist slash group that wouldn't have made this list, you know, because it was hard to really define them as a group, which was R. Kelly slash Public Announcement. Because on the first album by them, it was all R. Kelly who sang all of the songs and all the music, all the background vocals on the first album, and he didn't even know Public Announcement. They were actually added onto the record because the record label Jive thought that he wouldn't sell as a solo artist, that he needed to have a group with him, and so they forced him on that record, on the first record. And so when you saw the videos and saw him on tour, you saw them together, but they had, Public Announcement had to learn the songs and learn all that, and that's why you know, they don't really fit as a group. Even though on the second album, they were on the second album, but by the time you got to the third album, they were gone again. So the up and down nature of that collaboration is one of the reasons why you won't see R. Kelly slash Public Announcement on this list. Actually, Public Announcement had a better chance at being on the list as the group Public Announcement than R. Kelly Public Announcement did for the list. But again, there just wasn't enough room because this top 20 is chock full of some of the best groups that came out of the 90s. And so without any further delay, we want to get into the top soul male groups, singing groups of the 90s with this particular list. Coming in at number 20 is the group out of Cleveland, the Rude Boys. This group was formulated by singer Gerald Levert, and his impact, not only with the group and on the first song, is the reason why Written All Over Your Face went all the way up to #1 on the R&B charts. They followed that up with another #1 song, Are You Lonely For Me? And they had success not only at radio, but they also won Billboard's award that year for the #1 single R&B for the charts. So they had a strong impact at radio, and Written All Over Your Face was just a great radio song. And so coming in at number 20, the Rude Boys. And coming in at number 19 is the group from California, the group called IMMATURE. They were anything but that because they had a lot of success at R&B and at pop radio. They had 3 albums that had success during the 90s, On Our Worst Behavior, Playtime Is Over, and We Got It, which is, you know, probably my favorite, a little bit of live, you know, performance on that one. But their success at radio had some really big hits, stuff like Constantly and Never Lie, and I Don't Mind. It went to the top of the R&B charts and also charted very big at the pop chart level, which made them a crossover act beyond just the soul music realm, and well as, you know, their lead singer Marcus Houston that went on to stardom not only as an individual soul singer but also as an actor in TV shows and such forth. And so their impact went beyond just the music realm, which is why coming in number 19, the group IMMATURE. And coming in at number 18 is Houston's own H-Town. Now this group was able to get their demo music over to the hands of lead rapper Luke from 2 Live Crew, who had his big impact in the music industry. And he liked what he heard, and he was able to promote and to push this group H-Town and their first single, which actually fit the same moniker of the 2 Live Crew type of feel and sound, but from a soul music realm, with that big hit Knockin' the Boots, which went all the way up to #1 on the R&B charts and #3 at the pop charts. And they followed up with other singles like Keeping My Composure, which is one of my favorite songs by them, and also a second album which also had success, not as big as the first album, but sold a lot of records. Unfortunately, they lost their lead singer, which is the reason why their impact didn't go beyond the 90s, but they were very strong, and that song, Knocking the Boots, is one of the major reasons why. Coming in at number 18, H-Town. Now coming in at number 17 is New York's own, and in particular Brooklyn's own, the group called Intro. Now we have Heavy D to thank for this group coming to the forefront, as he was able to work with and discover the lead singer and producer of the group, and the whole sound that was going on at the time. They worked with the group to come up with their first album, which I know for me, I played so many times in my house, because I loved that first album. The songs were Let Me Be the One, Come Inside, which were, at the top of the charts for them. But it was their remake of Ribbon in the Sky that really warmed the hearts of soul lovers. And then they had the audacity and the greatness to actually get Stevie Wonder to actually perform with them in the video for Ribbon in the Sky, and it actually endeared this group Intro to our hearts and with their sound. The Campbell second album, which one of my other favorite songs, but it's funny how time flies, was on. But unfortunately, just like the group before us, H-Town, they also lost their lead singer, which is the major reason why their impact was short-lived with the two albums and didn't go beyond that. But we appreciate the music they gave us, and that's the reason why coming at number 17 is the group called Intro. And now, coming in at number 16 is the group out of Minneapolis, the group called Next. Yeah, they were next up, and they were one of the groups at the latter half of the decade of the 90s. So they only had one album that actually fits the 90s profile, but it was huge. That record went double platinum in its short time, at the end of the decade, primarily because of two big hits off of that album. Of course, the big hit called Too Close, which went to #1 on R&B and shot up also at the pop charts. And then their other single called Wifey, which also went to #1 at the R&B charts. So their impact was more felt at the end of the decade and at the end of the male soul renaissance, but nonetheless, it was still just as impactful. And so coming in at number 16 is the group called Next. And now coming in at number 15 is another group out of New York, the group called Soul For Real. Now, Soul For Real was Uptown Records, group that they put into the 90s with the male soul dominance that was going on at the top of the era. Another group that was under the tutelage of Heavy D. Probably need to do a show on Heavy D, just how great his impact was from a music standpoint, a producer standpoint, as well as actor, and just culturally how much we loved Heavy D. So might have to do a special show on Heavy D. But his impact was very strong with this group. And when they first came out, they gave us a Jackson 5 type of vibe, with their music sound and dance moves and so forth that we saw in the videos. And they had two big hits that shot up to the top of the charts. Candy Rain, which went up to #1 at the R&B charts. And Every Little Thing You Do, that also went to the top of the R&B charts. And both of them had pop success that led that first record all the way up to double platinum status. So they sold a lot of records. They came out with a second and even a third album later on. It didn't have as much of a success, but the impact was felt nevertheless. And that's the reason why coming in at number 15 is the group Soul For Real. And coming in at number 14 is the group out of Atlanta, Georgia, the group called Jagged Edge. Like I mentioned earlier, there were so many artists and labels that were throwing their hat in the ring trying to find their soul group. And this was So So Def / Jermaine Dupri's entry into the soul male group realm with the group Jagged Edge that he was able to put together and put out. And at the end of the decade, they had their impact which continued into the 2000s. But I wanted to make sure I showed enough love to the end of the decade, where there were some groups that actually were strong. And with their first album that fits the profile, they had a big hit song, I Gotta Be, which peaked to the top of the charts, and it led them all to having a gold record with this first album that they had. Now later, succinctly, they had other albums in the 2000s that went platinum and double platinum, but their success in the 90s and their impact as they continued the tradition of groups like Boyz II Men with the singing group, is the reason why Jagged Edge comes in at number 14. And coming in at number 13 is the group out of California called Troop. Now, Troop was one of those unique cases for this list because technically they did start in '89, and they had a couple of moderate hits, '89, like Mamacita, just to name one of them. And their second album actually came out in '89, and it had Spread My Wings, was a song that charted in '89, but it flipped over to '90. And then All I Do Is Think of You was a monster hit for them, which actually charted in '90. And I Will Always Love You is another song that charted in the '90s, along with their remake of the Adele song, the Deal song, Sweet November. So they had a lot of chart success in the '90s, even though they actually started in the '80s. But I felt that this is a group that we could not do this list without having Troop on this list, even though their impact really started in the '90s. So we kind of like moved it so they could fit this list. But they were one of the powerful, soul, groups, and they were one of the groups that a lot of people copied, with their sound, their dance moves. But they were so impactful during that era is the main reason why coming in at number 13 is the group called Troop. And now at number 12 is the group out of Oklahoma City, the group called Color Me Bad. Now, Color Me Bad again is is the shining example that you can find talent anywhere in the country if you look hard enough. And even though this group, was from Oklahoma City, they got around, to other cities and got finally noticed by Cassandra Mills at Giant Records, who signed them and wanted to put them out. And they were fortunate that they got a song that people turned down. Belle Biv DeVoe and Keith Sweat and Christopher Williams all turned down the song, I Wanna Sex You Up. But they recorded a song, and it made the New Jack City soundtrack, which helped sell that soundtrack. It was impactful for the movie, and it was impactful for them because it changed their very lives. As their first record, CMB, sold over 3 million copies here in the US and over 6 million worldwide off of the strength of that one song. Even though their second song, I Adore Me and More, also went to the top of both charts, they actually sold a lot of records and made a big impact with that, and then subsequently had other records after that. But they sold a lot of records, and they actually were the kind of group that showcased, the whole soul music group that we saw coming out of the 90s. And so coming in at number 12 is the group called Color Me Bad. And now at number 11 is the group out of Washington, D.C., and in particular Howard University, the group called Shy. And they were anything but shy, as they were very bodacious with their musical sound and with their cultural idioms that they wanted to push forth, as they had African symbols and cultures in a lot of their videos and in their music, which is a byproduct of their teachings at Howard University, and also their love with their fraternity Alpha Phi Alpha. That was so predominant in their music and what they were trying to do and come across. And so their first album came out, and they had a top #1 song, If I Ever Fall in Love, which was almost like a doo-wop, kind of song with no music, really no music, and just their voices being the impact. And it shot to the top of the charts, along with other songs they had on the album like Comforter. They went to the top of the charts and sold 3 million records off the first record. The second album also went platinum. Right Where We Belong, which was the Beverly Hills Soundtrack 3 song that also led to that second album. They had a lot of impact, and that's what made them so strong. And bringing them in at number 11 is the group called Shy. Now that was just the back half of the countdown, numbers 20 to 11. And now we find ourselves starting the top 10 of our soul male groups of the 90s list. And coming at number 10 is the group from Waco, Texas, the group called High Five. The High Five, these young cats came out of nowhere and got signed to Jive Records. The first album produced by Teddy Riley. And it must be something special when the first song you record and you drop at radio goes all the way to #1 on the R&B charts, and also #1 on the pop charts. That's what the song I Like the Way the Kissing Game did. That's how big and how powerful that song was. Another song that was off that album that was also pretty big, She's Playing Hard to Get. And they wrote hits like that all the way up to platinum status on the first record. And they didn't stop there. The second album, went gold with songs like Quality Time that was written by R. Kelly, Never Should Let You Go, and one of my favorites by them, Can't Wait Another Minute. So they had a lot of success at radio and a lot of success with the group. The hurtful thing about the group is that during the second record, car accident, injured a couple of members, and then later on they lost their lead singer, to an accident as well, and so they never, even though they did record a couple albums after the first two, it didn't get as much traction as those first two because of some of the tragedies that went along with this group. But we didn't forget you because we enjoyed the music that you gave us. And so coming in at number 10 is the group called High Five. And now at number 9 is the group out of New York, the group called BLACKSTREET. Now this group featured Teddy Riley, and this was on the heels of the group that he started, Guy, that was the main act when it came down to the New Jack Swing era. But when Guy started to disappear or dissipate and they started to break up, instead of trying to fix the group Guy, he decided to start a whole nother group, which is why he started the group BLACKSTREET. And he found 3 to 4 very extraordinary, singers, and they came out the box smoking with a song called Booty Call, which was it was in the movie Booty Call as well. But it really wasn't the fast songs that really made this album really, take off. It helped sell records, and the first album went platinum, but we all remember the ballads off of this group and from this album, and also the ballads of this group. Before I Let You Go was a beautiful love song ballad that, Can I Get a Kiss Goodnight? I really love that song. And then songs like Tonight's Tonight, Joy were also big songs off that album. And so again, it went platinum with #1 songs like Booty Call. But it didn't stop there because the second album by them was even bigger. Sold 4 million copies with the second album, Another Level, that went #1 on the R&B charts, backed by the lead single produced by Dr. Dre, No Diggity. Now, No Diggity is one of those songs you could hear almost any weekend in the hood at a party somewhere. You're going to hear that song somewhere. But they also had some other, wonderful songs on the album too. The ballads like I Can't Get You Out of My Mind, and the unique song that ended off the album was a song called The Lord Is Real, which was a gospel take on a DeBarge song, Time Will Reveal. And again, it was a lovely song, you know, a great rendition that Teddy Riley created with that. And it made the album so special, it made the group special, and it actually was able to separate them from the group Guy, that this was a whole different incarnation. It just was a continuation of what Teddy Riley already did. This was a whole new sound, a whole new look, with a whole new outlook, which is the reason why coming in number 9 is the group called BLACKSTREET. And now we're up to number 8. And number 8 group is a group out of Boston, the group called BBD, otherwise known as Belle, Biv, and DeVoe. Now, when New Edition was starting to break up and the artists were starting to go solo, where Bobby Brown left first, and then eventually Ralph Tresvant, you know, left. Johnny Gill joined the group, and then he left. Nobody thought the other 3 guys were going to do anything else, you know, after that. You know, we just didn't expect anything. And so when it was announced that they were dropping the album with the last 3 members of New Edition, we didn't know what to think. But they surprised us. And they gave us a great album with a lead single called Poison, Never Trust a Big Button to Smile, that went all the way to number 1 and took that album all the way to selling 4 million copies of that album, with songs like Do Me, BBD, I Thought It Was Me, and the beautiful ballad and lovely video, When Will I See You Smile Again. Wonderful song. We didn't know that they had this in them. Like I said, they surprised us, and they actually then became one of the power groups of that period of not only just the New Jack Swing era, but also this soul male group singing group era of the early 90s. They actually walked in both worlds, and they had an impact with soul music during that era. The second album, Hootie Mack, went gold, where they had songs like Above the Rim from the movie. And then another lovely ballad that I know I enjoy, and you probably enjoy too, Something in Your Eyes. So we're so thankful that they weren't just, you know, 3 guys, you know, the other members of New Edition who decided, you know, we're done if the group is not going to be together. And we're so glad that they gave us the incarnation that they gave us as BBD, Belle, Biv, DeVoe. And that's the reason why coming in at number 8 on our countdown list, BBD. And now up to number 7, and we find ourselves looking at the group from Atlanta, Georgia, a group called Silk. Now, like we said earlier in the show, that everybody who was the artist or producer at the time wanted to jump in the fray to put their own stamp of approval on the group, you know, dynamic that was happening at R&B with, you know, female artists and with male artists. And this was no exception, because Keith Sweat had did the female and the male. We'll talk about the other group, Cut Close, in one of the other videos. But this one, he was able to work with the group, you know, named Silk, and helped use his connections at his label to get them signed with that label and to push them out as the soul group they were. And so the first single, Happy Days, featured, you know, Keith Sweat on it with them to try and make you guilty by association. If you like Keith Sweat, you'll like Silk. And the trick worked, because they did like the group Silk. And Happy Days was a strong song. But it was the second single that came afterwards that really took them to another stratosphere, which is the song Freak Me, which went all the way to number 1 on the R&B charts, and number 1 all the way up to the pop charts. And so it was dominating radio at that time. And they also came with one of the lovely ballads on the album called Lose Control. And those of us who bought the album and know that song, we know just how great that song is. The album wound up going 2 times platinum, which is, you know, again, 2 million copies. And it didn't stop there, because over the years, Silk has recorded a number of albums Some have gone platinum and some have gone gold, with other hits like I Can Go Deep and Meeting in My Bedroom. The one thing that they did, which was similar to Keith Sweat in their sound, is that they came with songs and ballads, that were risque, that really dealt with the sexual energy that goes on between a couple, and between people, and that's what their songs really, revolved around. And it was something that we got into, and we enjoyed what they were giving us, and that's why coming in at number 7 is the group called Silk. And coming in at number 6 is my boys, the group from out of Minneapolis, the group called Mint Condition. And the group they were, because they were a band, they were not only just singers, but they played instruments, which was unique to a lot of the groups on this list. Most of them are singing groups, but this is a band, and we were happy to have them. Founded or discovered by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis when they heard their sound from the local scene. And they signed them to their record label when they got a record label named Perspective Records. With groups like Low Key and Sounds of Blackness, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis label Perspective Records was really making things happening. And Mint Condition were the stars that they had. Now they came out the box trying to give the funk on the first album, but it wasn't the funk that took everybody over. Because it was the ballads that were on the first album that won our hearts and our minds, with Breaking My Heart and Forever in My Eyes. Breaking My Heart also went to the top of the charts, which made the album sell so much on that record. But it didn't stop there. The second album was the one that really took over, that gave them the platinum status that they were having, with songs like You Send Me Swinging, Someone to Love, and So Fine, which were great ballads. And that's what we come to love about Mint Condition. We know that as a band, they gave us good funk and good live, musicianship on their records, but it was the ballads that really took us over and really drew us into them. They had so many other ballads after that, songs like If You Love Me, What Kind of Man Would I Be, You Don't Have to Hurt No More. Just some of the few, songs that they had that were ballads. But the best thing about Mint Condition is anybody who's ever owned some of their records would know that if you just put the record on, you will just be taken away with the musicianship, and the sound they gave us. And some of the songs that didn't hit radio, like 10 Million Strong, you love that even more, when you hear the musicianship and the songs and how they put it together. And so it was good for us during this era of the soul groups to actually get, a band as a part of the process. And that's what made them so special. And that's the reason why coming in number 6 is the group Mint Condition. And now we're up to number 5. And the number 5 group on the list is the group out of Baltimore, a group known as Dru Hill. Now, Dru Hill was, 4 guys that named themselves after the park there in Baltimore, and they got themselves signed to a record label. And, sometimes there can be one thing that you do or say that just takes off, and when that first video hit, Tell Me, and the mood they was hitting, tell me what the mood they were doing and the whole thing, it was, you can't hear that song now without trying to do the move, and it just endeared us, to the group Dru Hill, and they didn't stop, winning our hearts, because that was the up-tempo song, but it was the ballads that just knocked us, knocked our socks off. The first album went platinum, with songs like 5 Steps, Never Make a Promise, In My Bed, just a few of the songs that were ballad love songs they gave us off the first album, along with the big hit Tell Me that went number 1 on the charts. But then the second album, came out and went double platinum, with songs like How Deep Is Your Love, and as well as a song called Beauty. And so they were very special with their ballads. They even had a ballad off of the Soul Food soundtrack called We're Not Making Love that also went to the top of the R&B charts. And that's what they gave us. They gave us, like a gritty love ballad soul drama, with their music. And we ate it up. We enjoyed everything that they were giving us. And that's why coming in at number 5 is the group Dru Hill. And coming in at number 4 is a group out of Minneapolis, the group named After 7. Now, most of us know After 7 when they first, were announced they were coming out. They were, family members of Babyface, a couple of brothers and a cousin. Found out later that the third member really wasn't a cousin, by birth, but they're family, and we have seen so many other family members of famous, people come out with records that really didn't go anywhere. And so the thought was, this is just another one of those nepotism situations where, they would come out with a record and they wouldn't be that special. But that wasn't the case. Because they came out with the lead single Can't Stop that went all the way to number 1 on the R&B charts and then to also at the top of the pop charts. And also came with their second single, Ready or Not, that also went to number 1 on the R&B charts. That's the way to come out the box, and that's not, you don't get number 1 records just because you're famous or you're related to a famous person. You have to be talented and you got to give something that the people liked. And they gave us a sound that we really loved and we enjoyed. And the first record with platinum with another song like Heat of the Moment, which was also a big song at both R&B and pop radio. And they didn't stop there. They kept giving us platinum records after that with big songs like Nights Like This, Can He Love You Like This, Till You Do Me Right. Then they did their own remake of the Intruder song, Baby I'm Real, Baby I'm For Real. So they gave us so many great songs over the years, and they carved a niche with their own sound, which they were actually able to distance themselves or separate themselves from being Babyface's brothers or family. They actually made a name for themselves, and that name was After 7. And that's the reason why coming in at number 4 is the group After 7. And now coming in at number 3 is the group out of Oakland, California, the group otherwise known as TONI, Tone. They actually were one of the groups that actually had their first album come out in the late 80s with a modest hit called Little Walter. But it wasn't until the 90s that they went from being just a nice, obscure group with the kind of look and the sound that was coming out of the West Coast at the time, with people like Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul that had that look, that feel, that sound that was so different and unique from the rest of the U.S. And then the second album dropped, Revival, and it was a wrap, because now, similar to like Mint Condition, they were a band, and they actually gave us a sound unlike any other that we were hearing at the time. And so when they gave us a song like Feels Good, it felt good because it almost gave you got excited, you fell in love with the song because it gave you a feel of a sound that was almost, back in the day kind of sound, but it made you, just jump and make you really love a song like that. A really a joy song, called Feels Good. The second album also went, even though it went platinum, it gave us songs like It Never Rains in Southern California and songs like Wherever You Want. There was also another lovely ballad that was off of that first song. The Blues was another big song off of that album. And it established them as a sound that you couldn't copy, but it was uniquely, theirs, and we loved them for it. And then they just, upped the ante, because the next album, Sons of Soul, was even bigger. This one sold 2 million records. It had songs like Anniversary, and for those of us who bought the album know that the album version is the one you want to hear, because that's the 9-minute version, not the short version that was on the radio. But If I Had No Loot was the fast song that took off. But again, it was the ballads that we loved. Songs like Lay Your Head in My Pillow and Slow Wine were also big songs that we loved that were off of the album Sons of Soul. And Tony had another album in the 90s, House of Music, which is the last album they actually performed together as a group, with the hit song Let's Get Down and Thinking of You, which also went platinum. So we were happy to get this band and at least get 3 great albums, 4 altogether if you count the one that was in the late 80s. But the albums that were in the 90s were so special and so unique that we would love for them to get back together and give us another one. But we'll be satisfied with the hit songs that they gave us, and that's why coming at number 3 is the group Toni, Tone. And now at number 2 is the group out of North Carolina, in particular Charlotte, North Carolina, the group known as JODECI. These 4 guys, got together way back in the day. Casey and JoJo, they started out, doing gospel, and they met up with Mr. Dalvin and Devante and created this group. And they started producing songs, together and trying to get their name out there. Produced by, Devante. He went door to door trying to get people to hear his music, and eventually wound up on the doorstep of Andre Harrell at Uptown Records, who was putting together a nice little roster of the sound and the music that he was trying to do, which was, Motown was there, Uptown is what's next, and that's what Andre Harrell was creating, and he did create it. And he started with the group what we would call JODECI, and along with Puffy, they were able to craft a look for them which was different than everybody else at the time, because if Boyz II Men were the good guys, then JODECI was the bad boys, and so you need both, musically they gave it to us. And so JODECI, they came with the street clothes, the boots, and everything that went along with that, the tank tops and whatever they were, trying to give us with the sound. But that first album, Forever My Lady, again, the ballads is what, took off for a lot of these groups. We loved, what the men were giving us on the ballad side. And so the songs like Forever My Lady, Come and Talk to Me, and Stay all went to the top of the R&B charts. And they rode those 3 songs all the way to 3 million records sold. That's how big that first album was, coming out the box. And it didn't even stop there, because the next record, Diary of a Mad Band, sold even more records. They did 4 million on that with songs like Cry for You and Fiendin', which were big, ballads. And we loved the ballads that they were giving us, that because they had that churchy, soulful sound JODECI had, which made them different from everybody else. And people were trying to copy them, but they couldn't get there, because that down-home Southern soulful, church voices that Casey and JoJo had made it so special. They had one more album in the decade, the show, the After Party in the Hotel. Probably the one up-tempo hits that they had was Get On Up, that was on this record, Love You for Life, and Freaking You, which was probably the biggest song off of that album, which really was very special. And after that, they kind of broke up at that and went their separate ways. KJ and JoJo went solo. Devante did a solo album and got into producing and so forth for other people, big time. But what they gave us in that period of time with those 3 albums in about a 5 to 6 year span was special. It was unique. It was dynamic. And I don't know if we would hear something that was that gritty and soulful with a gospel tinge to it, like that in such a short period again. And that's why coming in at number 2 is the group called JODECI. Finally, after a long show, we finally get to number 1 on our, male soul groups of the 90s list. And is it any doubt who number 1 is? The group out of Philadelphia, Boyz II Men. Motown Philly back again with the album called Cooley High Harmony, which was, very special. They were trying to put together, say that they were moving from Motown, with the Philly sound. And what made it so special is because the group that came in number 8, BBD, because of their success as an act, it made them also successful, or having the chance to be successful as producers. And so that's what happened as Boyz II Men auditioned for Michael Bivins. And so that was a part of them getting out there, that we were here. And so their first album called Cooley High Harmony, that's one of the reasons why we got them doing a remake of one of the songs from the movie Cooley High, which is It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday, which again was, a big hit. And they had some lovely ballads that most people pass by, except for those who bought the albums, with songs like Please Don't Go and were great ballad songs. But the big song off of this, album, which was actually, kind of like, weird because they repackaged the first album, and the song End of the Road was one of those songs that just tore up radio, and it actually has solidified this group as a group that would be historic, with their music and with their sound, because the album Cooley High Harmony sold 9 million records. And over the years, the Boyz II Men, the group, have picked up 4 Grammys. They've been nominated more times than that, but they've picked up 4 Grammys. And there's the second album called 2, which was even bigger, because that album sold 10 million copies. And then they did something that was very unique in that they had a number 1 record, and then their number 1 record was replaced by their record, which went number 1. So they actually replaced themselves at number 1 with themselves, with the songs I'll Make Love to You, and then they replaced it with On Bended Knee. That's how big this group was and what they were doing, what they were putting out musically. And they were the major reason why this whole push to sign soul groups that were male happened, because of the success of this group. Everybody said, we need to go find the next Boyz II Men. We need to find 4 guys or 3 guys or 5 guys. How many people? We need to get a group together, because this is what's selling. This is what the people want. And they were the reason why this whole a lot of these groups got signed, or the push to sign artists like that is because of the success that Boyz II Men had. They had other songs like Water Runs Dry, which was another big hit off that record. And one of my favorite songs was the album cut called Trying Times. So if you got your album too, if you didn't listen to that song, go back and listen to it. You'll love that song. Boyz II Men had one more record in the decade, Evolution, which went 2 times platinum. But it had the song for Mama, as well as probably my favorite song by them, which is called Doing Just Fine. So they were special, they were unique, they were the leaders in the clubhouse. They were the ones that made it so that everybody else was able to eat, because everybody else was being signed and being pushed, and everybody was getting deals because of the impact that Boyz II Men had at the charts and in our culture at the time. So we thank you, Boyz II Men, for what you gave us musically and for your gifting, and for you coming in at number 1, the group called Boyz II Men. And now I just want to take the time to thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elevation. our top countdown show, where this week we just took a look at the 90s. And the 90s were special because it gave us so many male soul groups in the 90s. You know, everything from good guys to bad guys, from duets, the three guys, the quartets, to bands. They had it all during that time period, with big hits and a lot of love songs, a lot of ballads, you know, that we got from all these different groups. And we're so thankful for this time period, and we're so thankful that you tuned in to the show. We hope you enjoyed our countdown. We ask that you continue to watch some of the program that we put on at Euphoria Media. Check us out on YouTube. With this show, definitely we ask that you would like it, so you know, to comment, to share with fans, and subscribe to the channel. And also, if you do subscribe to the channel, click the button, you know, and put on notifications so you know when we have a new show that's putting up on the channel. Once again, thank you for tuning in this show of Elevation, and we'll see you next time.